our work. I'd like to take a moment to welcome everybody back from spring break. It's been a great couple of weeks off. I know that a lot of us were also working busily during spring break, so a little bit on, a little bit off. Can I please get a mover for the approval of the agenda? I see Trustee Duncan has moved, and can I get all those in favor? And I believe that is unanimous. Alrighty, so moving forward, approval of the minutes that the March 6, 2023 Combined Education Policy and Directions and Operations Policy and Planning Committee meeting, that's a mouthful, to be approved. Can I please get a mover for that as well? Trustee Duncan moves the approval of the minutes, and I'd like to call that to a vote. All those in favor?
Pardon me, Chair, before we vote, just a point of order, if I may.
Oh, please.
I just wanted to clarify that we're just voting for approval of the ed policy portion of the combined minutes.
That's right. You reminded me of this before and I forgot. So I'll read it one more time. Just the ed policy portion of the meeting. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you. So we'll jump right into if there is no business arising from those minutes, I'd like to jump us forward to section B of the agenda, presentations to the committee. And I will pass it over to Sheila Flood and Michelle Desreux and Carol Pickup to talk about global solutions for peace, equity, and sustainability.
I'll have to give the regrets for, sorry, Michelle, I just wanted to give regrets for Carol because her computer crashed. So I think it's just Michelle and I this evening, unless Sharon is here. Now it must be just two of us. So I'll leave it to you, Michelle, because you've got the presentation.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you. First of all, good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for making time on your agenda. I promise we'll keep to our time. I wanted to, first of all, my name is Michelle Desreux, and joining me today is Cheryl Flood. We are both members of the Victoria Peace School, which is a nonprofit civil society group here in Victoria, working to provide education and activities that support a more peaceful, sustainable, and equitable world. We are particularly interested in helping youth, especially teenagers, build a more informed, optimistic, and hopeful worldview. We're very concerned that there seems to be fairly significant levels of anxiety and depression, and I think we understand why from some of the dark, difficult things that they're seeing in their worlds. And we're very much committed to finding ways through education and projects that will help create a more optimistic and hopeful view, because we think hopeful people tend to get things done. To that end, we forwarded some information about a modular course that we've been working on that we think and hope could contribute positively to your high school curriculum resources. We sent a summary of the course to you via Kelly, and I wanted to check first to see if any of you had the opportunity to review the summary and any of the course content. Could I maybe just see a show of hands who had the opportunity to look at it? Oh, brilliant. Okay, so about half of you did. We could take a few minutes to review that introduction, but I'll maybe leave that till the end and just sort of tell you what it is that we're looking to accomplish. And then we can maybe look at it and use that as the basis for questions. The course was initially developed by Victoria's very esteemed and Nobel Prize winning Dr. Mary Wynne Ashford. I understand some of you may have known Dr. Mary Wynne Ashford. Show of hands on that one. Okay, so a few of you know who she was. In her honor, unfortunately, since her passing, we adapted the original course content with the specific goal of making it particularly relevant to high school level students. Our research and discussions so far with a few teachers suggest that it would fit well within the current grade 12 social and political studies curriculum as featured on your online curriculum guide. Right now, we're seeing it as a very flexible, cross-curriculum, modular, and online accessible course or backbone of course material that could be woven from various other curricula across the spectrum. We really are excited about the opportunity to make this available, obviously at no cost. It's something that we're doing as part of our goals with the Peace School at improving the lives of and the worldview of some of the people that are going to be part of our great future. So we're particularly interested in refining the course as it stands so far to include easier, more engaging learning assessment activities by the students. So whether it's Socratic discussions or jigsaw presentations, art projects. We know that kids these days love to make videos, to maybe use that as the basis for some of the learning experience, possibly even some community projects that could be developed as a result of this as well. So the overall goal is to breathe life into the idea of optimism and hopefulness by engagement with this kind of material. So tonight, our primary goal in meeting with you is to seek your endorsement and funding support to move to a next step, which is to work with 4 or 5 teachers in 3 or 4 half-day teacher training on call sessions, TTOCs, to make further refinements and pilot 3 of the 8 course modules that exist today through action research in the classroom over the next year to make sure that it is what it needs to be. In that way, the course, with obviously our ongoing support, those of us who are involved in this in the Peace School, we believe and hope that it could become very, very valuable to teachers as a free and available resource with rich content that includes lecture material, discussion session, Q&As, videos, documents, and so on, all of which could be used as teachers see fit to support their other learning objectives in their courses. So at this point, if you like, I could take you quickly just through the summary of the course content as the PowerPoint. It'll take about 2 minutes. Would that be acceptable? Yes? So bear with me. I think I will need whoever is in charge. I guess that would be you, Andy, to give me the ability to share my presentation.
Good evening. You should already have that access. Let me know if not.
Okay, so
To share your screen. If not, I can share and maybe move the slides for you.
okay, let me just find the share screen. There we go. And this is it here. Just pull that up so it's visible. Okay. Oh, and now we'll make this smaller so that everybody's seeing themselves. There we go.
And if you want to put that in, oh, you've got it. Looks great. Thank you.
So obviously the course as identified, global solutions for peace, equity, and sustainability. One of the questions that often comes up, not just with young people, but with lots of adults, is the UN, does it work? Does it matter? These are pretty big ideas. Global security, especially difficult to deal with today in terms of a big question. Global governance, treaties, what are they? They're big ideas and big structures. And the question that is often asked by young people is, why should we care about any of these things? So it is at the heart of the presentation material is this assumption that international cooperation is needed to solve global problems. And the Global Solutions course is about the kinds of initiatives, projects, and people that are making a difference along those lines today. Framework for education, giving the world's citizens a voice, so it speaks to the importance of social justice, climate, all of the major issues that are part of the UN's initiatives, and it talks about those things in the context of how can we work together and build projects that will help us make progress. Here is how we position what we believe peacefulness means or peace means. It's choosing the worldview based on these 4 fundamental principles. And the course is rich with stories of progress that is being made towards these goals that tend not to be featured in either the 24-hour news cycle or, frankly, a lot of the algorithmic control of media. This is the primary focus of the material, understanding the benefits and the challenges. It's a very much an exploration of proposals that exist today for reforms, especially within the UN, to meet more modern requirements. And more particularly, it's to look at all of the interconnections between governance, social justice, peace, climate change, and that includes things like the social development goals and things that are at the top of the UN focus area and world governance support. As mentioned, the course was developed initially by Dr. Mary Wynne Ashford. For those of you who know her, you know that she was indeed one of Canada's foremost peace activists. She has met with some of the most amazing people on the planet and done incredible work to move forward the causes of peace and equity. And of course, as mentioned, it uses presentations, films, and resources. So it's quite a varied collection of materials that are available. Currently, it's set up as 90-minute sessions, but they can be expanded, extended, or shortened to suit whatever the learning objectives are of the individual teachers. And these are the material, or the 8 modules. So this was our goal, to work with 1 to 3 or possibly 4 teachers to provide refinements to the structure and content, make sure that it fits well with the curriculum that's appropriate for the grade level, and to test final course materials within 1 or 2 schools over the next year with the support of the teachers who have an interest and an appetite to move forward with the program. So that is the material. And I think at this point, we would love to invite your questions and thoughts and comments.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I saw Trustee Duncan's hand and then Trustee Kwan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our lovely presenters for coming tonight. Hugs to Carol. I hope she's well and her computer is not turned on her. We all have been there when the computer says no.
That's right.
So, yeah, no, I just want to say thank you so much for drawing our attention to these course materials, or to the course modules. I think certainly in my time around this table, this is the first time that we've had folks come to us with obviously a very well thought out group of resources that we might incorporate. I wonder, I think it's quite timely. We do hear a lot about, how youth are feeling about the world around them, the world that they will inherit. And the youth I speak to are, realistic, but optimistic, and are looking to those of us, in positions of authority with decision-making power to demonstrate to them that we can be responsible leaders, but also that we care about the future and the world that we're leaving them. So, I really love the fact that the materials are drawing youth's attention to the world around them, to the possibilities of how international institutions, might help them to sort of forge a new world or make changes that are needed. Love the focus on social justice, but also environmental justice. So I would be really interested to hear, I think, from our staff about, what the next steps would be, how course materials are vetted and implemented within our school district. And I think our staff would be best placed to possibly suggest how that might be done. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for drawing our attention to the materials, and I really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Trustee Kwan.
I also want to say thank you so much for the presentation. It definitely brings back memories. Mary Wynne was one of my instructors or professors up at UVic when I was doing my BEd, and oh gosh, not a day goes by when I don't think about her. What an amazing lady, and so good to see her incorporated and living on through something like this. I actually had a question about whether, what kind of accreditation are we hoping to kind of integrate it into a course that's already there for accreditation purposes, or is it already credited as like a high school course where students would get credit for it?
Sheila, can I let you speak to that one?
Sure. I think we're the option of fitting it into other course materials, so it would be cross-curricular. We noticed in the social studies is an obvious one. It would fit into, or political studies. They seem to have international components. So it looked like it could, but it could fit in a whole variety of ways. And the timing, it's rich, the material. And there are a lot of resources there. So, the teachers are probably the best ones to know how to fit that in so it could really benefit the students.
Right. Thank you so much. I mean, I think Trustee Duncan really said, everything that needs to be said. It would, there would be probably work to be done with staff, but it would be absolutely amazing to see something like this incorporated into some of our high school classes, and honestly, at a lower level, our middle school as well. I know there's thirst for this kind of course content, so I really do appreciate you coming in and presenting.
Excellent.
Well, we really appreciate that you've welcomed us, really, because as you said, we're really excited about Mary Wynn's legacy continuing. We've been working on this for pretty well 3 years straight. And so, and I know she would want to see it continue. And her style was just so warm and based on storytelling and, very human. And that's all captured in the videos. And she, we all tried to get the right material in there. But she was the real mover behind it. So, that's our motivation. That's a good part of our motivation there as well.
So just to clarify from my perspective, the opportunity to meet and talk with some of your teachers, is there an appropriate next step for us to take in that regard? Is there someone that we should be in touch with specifically to be able to go to that discussion step with some teachers that would be interested in this?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I think I should leave it to staff to explain a bit further around that. Yeah, go ahead, Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, I just I know that we are very fortunate tonight that we have we've got our lovely GVTA rep here, Lena, who probably would shed some light on from a teacher's perspective. And then we also have our associate superintendent arts, who also might be able to help guide us in terms of next steps.
Wonderful. Yes, I was not sure if you guys had your hands up for questions or comment, but yeah, I'll pass it over to Lena.
Hi, thank you for that lovely presentation. And this course content looks really incredible. I can see it being a really valuable resource in the classroom. And I know that when teachers are connected with this work, like you're suggesting, I think that that's a really great idea, is to work with a few teachers for an afternoon, have them look at it and help to even make further connections. There's a lot of high school courses. I think that there's connections for these modules you're talking about, maybe not all in one course, but yeah, it looks like fabulous work. I really want to dive into it myself. So thank you.
It does lend itself very well to self-study for adult learners. It's very easy to work through that way and follow.
Wonderful, thank you. I also see Tom has his hand up, so please go ahead.
Sure. Having a little technical trouble. Can you hear me? Is that okay? Great, thank you. So I agree with some really rich and wonderful content here that definitely aligns with the number of courses that are currently happening in our schools. I think, as Lena was saying, working alongside the GVTA, we have a JCCI, a curriculum committee that we work together with, and we could have some discussion there on how we could look at this. I also think sharing this with the high schools would be a great starting place, and then they could share it with their departments and see where that interest is, and I think there would be some. In the end, teachers have the autonomy to choose how they will deliver their instruction in their classroom. So I think presenting it as an option and an offer and an opportunity for them to be able to reach out to you for those who are interested would be the best way for us to go. And as I say, just working alongside the GVTA around this and doing that the best way that we can.
Great, thank you so much for that clarification. Go ahead, Sheila.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that we did consult with a few teachers, but to be honest, we had such a hard time trying to get teachers. We contacted 5 or 6 who, without a response. And then luckily we were able to find 2 who sent in an email response, and then we met with 1. And we've gotten great suggestions from them. But in that process of trying to get feedback, we noticed that teachers are they seem to be incredibly busy, which I guess is normal. So yeah, we may need help in finding those teachers if that help could be had. If not, then we will, continue to try to find. But there's a teacher in Claremont who has a course called Global Solutions. His name is Mark Neufeld, but we just haven't been able to reach him. So, there's just problems like that.
Yeah, thanks, Sheila. Oh yes, go ahead, Lena.
I think that the best idea is to take it to our JCCI. We have a meeting coming up shortly, and so the GVTA could do a call out to help you find those teachers that would work with you. We would look at what the courses they teach, and find appropriate individuals to work with you if the district approved the release funding.
That would be absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
The ultimate objective.
Yes.
And we're excited to work with teachers, and ongoingly. Having been through the course a number of times, it's something that we'd be delighted to help co-teach if there was a professional development day that they wanted to go through the course with us. For those of us who've been working in this area for a while, we're happy to provide that ongoing support as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, Michelle and Sheila. It was a delight to see you guys here on this meeting today. Feel free to stick around for the rest of it. I'm going to take us forward onto the next section of our agenda, new business. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Deputy Superintendent Caldwell for the FESL memo and presentation.
I think probably best for us to step out, and we'll be in touch, I guess, for further developments and further connections with the appropriate people.
Great. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks very much. Thank you,
Thanks,
Emily.
Sheila.
Good night.
Good night. All righty, go ahead, Deputy Superintendent. You've got the floor.
Through the chair, thank you very much. We're having a bit of technical issue here. Can you all hear me?
The theme of
Yep.
the night.
As we continue to look at our framework for enhancing student learning, we have the pleasure of having Dr. Shelley Nimi present tonight on Indigenous education and the connections that are made through Indigenous education, through the ministry, through her work with the 4 houses, through the district team. And she has provided you a background information memo, which is included in that pack up as well. So I will turn it over to Dr. Shelley Nimi.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, and through to the chair. Nice to see everybody tonight. I just want to say hello, and I'm going to time myself because I know that we have a busy agenda and we have such great things to talk about. So I'm going to look over to Andy, who's going to run my slides for me, if that's okay. And then, and please do, if there's questions that come along the way, you can grab and stop and host that. So I'll go that through to the chair, but I'm really looking forward to talking a little bit about what we're going to be sharing tonight.
Kelly, I think this is the evening of technical glitches. So were you hoping to run the slides from the PDF, or did you have them as a PowerPoint presentation?
Kelly has them as PowerPoint. Tom passed them on, I know, but
okay,
I'm happy to do it either way, whatever is most convenient.
Let me quickly, I'm sure it's in my inbox. In that case, my apologies. 1 second. I have it. Sorry about that. One moment.
That's okay. It's like that awkward silence where I'm like, do I say something? Do I not? Maybe I'll just wait. And I'm just like, okay, here we go.
Okay, just loading up.
Thank you so much.
Okay, my apologies.
No, don't apologize. It's okay.
We were on break for 2 weeks, so it's understandable. I mean, how many times I fumbled right at the beginning of this meeting? Like it's been 2 weeks.
I'm obviously rusty. Okay, it's just loading up on my screen now. Okay. And I will put that into presentation and turn the slides on your request.
Sure. So maybe we'll start with slide 2. And I'll just reference as it relates to what Deputy Caldwell had shared. So we'll go actually back one slide, apologize. Yeah, so goal 2 here. So as we start this evening, I just want to say it's great. So it's nice to see everybody, to be present with you, sit in circle and share a little bit about not only Indigenous education, but how Indigenous education is the responsibility of everyone. And so that's not just us as a department, that's us as a department walking aside and beside governance, as it walks beside teachers, as it walks beside district team and community. And so really wanted to start with, how does goal 2 become activated and implemented across our school district? I have the fortunate ability to navigate the bridge, I think, between Indigenous community and our school district. And those of you that were on the board as you were navigating through this strategic plan in 2020, one of the things that I can share with the new board members is that Indigenous community really stepped forward to be able to say, we want to be seen within the strategic plan. If you're going to do anything within the strategic plan, please ensure that you include what it means to be culturally responsive. And so through that work, through community, goal 2, goal 1, and goal 3 became very grounded and rooted within culturally responsive learning environments. So what goal 2 says for us, and how that's tied as a thread through everything that we're doing in FESTL, in our reports, in our documentation, and in our training, it says, what does it mean to create a culturally responsive learning environment that will support Indigenous learners' personal and academic success? Community also said at that time, do not create 10, 12 different recommendations on how to get there. Really have some strategies that you should be focusing on over the next 3 to 5 years intentfully, and activate that as a school district. So that takes us to the next slide, where this slide said, from lots of those discussions, there's things that we need to do as a system. The first thing that we need to do is we really need to examine what is our personal and systemic biases, attitudes, beliefs, and values, and those practices, and how does that increase student and staff understanding and appreciation of Indigenous worldviews, histories, and perspectives. And how are we doing that from the place that we're on? We're on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen people. So what does that actually mean for us? And how are we in relation with the 4 houses that we have? And how are we activating that in the work that we're doing, not just as a department, but across the entire system, through the work that district team is doing, through the work that governance is doing, through the work that classroom teachers are doing. Strategy 2 really, I can't stress this enough, really says, how are you actively engaging and in collaboration with local nations, Indigenous educators, Indigenous community leaders, elders, and families to enhance Indigenous student learning and well-being and identity? Oftentimes, community said that they didn't feel seen or heard and reflected in Greater Victoria School District, and that they might see that that is building its capacity, but how do we maintain that and keep that moving forward? And strategy 3 says, and it continues to echo all of the reports that we have, that says there is an inequity of outcomes for Indigenous learners between Indigenous and non-Indigenous learners in the Greater Victoria School District. And this can be seen through literacy, numeracy, and our completion rates. And so how do we start to be able to look at and improve closing that gap of inequity through the certain things that we're going to be talking about this evening? So to the next slide, Andy, please. Which first and foremost must be acknowledged, right? And we're unique, right? We're unique in the sense that every school district has a different way that they represent their Indigenous communities. In Greater Victoria School District, we are referenced as the 4 houses. That came from community. That wasn't School District 61 identifying that. You may have heard language in the past where there was ANEC, which was the All Nations Education Council, which used to be Native Student Education Council, which used to be First Nations Education Council. And it's shifted and it's changed over the time. Where it's arrived at in the last 3 years is this community was very strong in the sense that we are 4 houses. We have a very distinction-based need for the way that we need to be in a relationship, yet we all value Indigenous education. So the way that we have relationships with the 4 houses that we have is through the agreements that we have, but that there is also a uniqueness that they come together to be able to navigate on larger topics, such as things that we are going to be working on this year through a new terms of reference on our 4 houses, because it's changed now from what it used to be and how it has been over the last 50 years in the Greater Victoria School District. But we have 4 houses, which might look different than the Souk School District or other province or other districts across the province. But for us, it's the 2 local rights holders, which is Songhees and Esquimalt Nation, who we have LEAs with. It's the Métis Nation of Greater Victoria, and it's UFIA, the Urban People's House Indigenous Advisory. And for those that might be watching on YouTube, right, for us, this is about acknowledging that we have over 1,500 self-identified Indigenous learners that the Greater Victoria School District has a responsibility for, that are represented across these 4 houses, and how we are in that relationship to ensure that community feels seen and heard through that. So the next slide, please, Andy. Which comes to this part, which I'm actually really excited to talk about, because when we go back to looking at the strategies that came from community that said, please make sure that you are absolutely engaging with community, you're bringing us into the dialogue, into the conversations, and that we're starting to activate things intentionally, and that we're doing it from an uncolonial way. So we're looking at it through an Indigenous worldview and perspective. A year and a half ago, this framework started to conceptualize. And so what had happened is the Ministry of Education provided some funding, mental health grant to the district for funding, and it was coming out of COVID, and it was coming as the return back to school and looking at strategies for Indigenous learners. And so the piece that came with that funding grant was, number 1, engage with the communities for which you represent. So that's our 4 houses. Number 2, make sure that it's anchored in a wellness approach. So what does that look like from a mental health wellness approach as students are returning back to the classroom and we're navigating forward? And how are you doing that? That ties back into what it means to be culturally responsive and relevant for us. And so as we've navigated over the last year and a half, this framework you're going to hear this evening is starting to take shape now. And so it is an early years, an elementary framework, middle framework, secondary framework, because we really do need to look at what does the support framework look like across the various levels for Indigenous students and families, but how is it the responsibility and activated by all? So which will take us to the next slide. A year and a half ago, there was a cross collaboration that started between the district mental health team and the IED department, looking at this particular funding on how to build a framework, which the acronym is called IK-SEL, Indigenous Knowledge, Social Emotional Learning. So how are you having a holistic lens to this through an Indigenous knowledge perspective? And who needed to be involved in this process? So when we go back to our strategies and we're looking at, we really need to be engaged actively and with in a meaningful way with community. That was our 4 houses and our elders advisory. So the 4 houses elders advisory have been along this whole process with the development of this framework with Indigenous educators and Indigenous staff. And why I say that is because this framework was written by Indigenous people to support Indigenous students and families, but it's not the responsibility to be fully implemented by Indigenous staff. It's the responsibility of the district to do the implementation. And so the activities and the pieces of this framework that you're going to see is actually what's been activated through the district team and what's been activated through schools as we walk beside to help this implementation of this framework to support Indigenous learners. It's really important to know that this logo was designed by a Lekwungen artist. So Jessica Joseph designed this logo for this framework. It has 4 animals which are inside the bulb. And so this is a chocolate lily. The chocolate lily is a part of the community here. And for community, when they were starting to navigate through, what is this going to look like, this framework? The image of something local was really important. The image representing early years, elementary, middle, and secondary was really important. And to not lose the work that came from ANEC, or at that time, it started under, when it was the First Nations Education Council, which was the spirit of alliance. And so many of you may have or might have the remembering of what the spirit of alliance was. And that's the 4 animals, because they said those 4 animals really do anchor on to the philosophical understanding of the supports that are required for Indigenous children and family to thrive through an institution, and to make sure that it's not captured in a colonial way. So we need a holistic approach to this framework. The one modification that's going to come to this image is going to be the inclusion of a little baby bulb just below the first chocolate lily. And that baby bulb is really going to represent early years. So as our children are starting to grow into the education system, and then each chocolate lily is going to represent the different level: elementary, middle, secondary, all of it rooted within the community. Next slide, please, Andy. So there's 4 quadrants, and this took a lot of time to navigate through, making sure that the time went back to have the engagement, have the conversations, take it back to community, spend time in community, come back, make sure that it was written and aligned. And so the 4 animals stayed the same from Spirit of Alliance, which was the bear, the wolf, the salmon, and the raven. And what activated through the focus of the holistic lens was what is going to continue to match with each of these animals and the imagery that's going to come with that. So bear really is engagement and location. So how are we working with Indigenous children and families in the Greater Victoria School District to ensure that we're actively activating engagement and location? How are we doing that through social and emotional support? How are we doing that through belonging, transitions, and connection? And how are we focused on learning and academic support? Again, tying it back to what were the strategies that goal 2 of the strategic plan indicated, and how is that then tied to distinction-based data that we find within FESL. And this is where you're going to start to see the thread being woven between not only Indigenous people and us as educators in the system walking beside everyone, but that's how are we supporting the implementation of that through aspects like sitting here at governance or working with district team as they're activating this work out in the field for us. So we're going to share 4 little stories about how that's happening, so you can kind of start to see the work, and then I'll tell you what's coming up next for training for each of the levels as well, and how you're always welcome to be a part of any of those opportunities that are coming. So go to the next slide, Andy. So this slide here really talks about engagement and location. And so as the writing team started to come together, it first and foremost said Indigenous students, when they're supported, when they see themselves within the education system, and that this is through the inclusion of Indigenous worldviews and perspectives in the curriculum, teaching practices, and then in the delivery of support services that they are receiving. Because Indigenous students are walking in 2 worlds. They're walking in their Indigenous worldview, and at times when they're walking through the school community, they're changing and shifting into being a border crosser into a Western pedagogy or a Western worldview. And how do they maintain who they are within that through engagement and location? And how is this done within the classroom? And how is this done through the supports and the teachings that they're receiving? The story that you have here is activated through some of the work that we were doing with the secondary district team and with classrooms. And what you see here is a secondary, actually, I also don't want to forget, so I apologize for not saying also right up the top, is Pathways and Partnerships. This is such a cool initiative that we were doing as well. And they also, the 3 of us in that big work were able to activate number one, what is relevant? What did this young person need to be a participant and an active participant in their learning? Number two, what was going to inspire the ability to feel that they were seen and heard within this? And how was it going to give back in that guidance of the 4 R's through relationship and reciprocity? When Pathways and Partnerships and the secondary school sat down with the teacher to be able to kind of navigate some of the pieces of bringing some of the opportunities in for how might this look, what would be an appropriate opportunity, how do I not have a cultural appropriation, all of those questions start to come up for somebody as they're navigating through this. What came as an outcome of this is as you see this young person working in woodwork, and they were absolutely certain all the way through that they wanted to create bowls that were going to be used in their naming, right, of something that was really special for them in a cultural activity that was going to be a part of who they were when it tied back to identity. This engagement kept this youth not only connected, but feeling seen through their work of being able to select a project in their classroom with their teacher supporting them through Pathways and Partnership and secondary district team to kind of get that foundational work activated, where we actually were able just to use the framework to be able to guide the process. We use the framework, but actually said, we're not going to lead this process. This is actually for non-Indigenous people to lead with Indigenous students. So then that way it became this partnership. This is one of the things that became really successful for this young person. And the feedback that was received was very much that it was emotional. It was an emotional attachment because not only were they able to produce something that had value and meaning, but it was going to be seen with their community for who they are. This is the part of tying Indigenous worldviews and not having to give up your identity when you come into the classroom and swap that for a Western perspective for this young person. So they were supported all the way through that, but it was a learning process for all of the different departments attached to activating this work. So number one, this is Bear. This is a really cool project that I really wanted to share, made sure that it got put onto the screen. We'll go to slide 2. This one too, they're all so beautiful, but we're putting together WOLF. WOLF is social emotional support. So what did that look like? What does it mean for having reciprocity? And what does it mean for youth when they feel reciprocity? What does it mean when they feel respected, valued? And how is this taught and modeled? So when culturally relevant social and emotional supports are accessible to Indigenous students and are woven into their learning experience, their connection to self and their school community strengthen in a holistic and meaningful way. I had the privilege of sitting at the back of the big canoe here, so I was the one that was taking the photos. This was on National Indigenous Day. This was down at Royal Roads. And one of the things that we participated in and the youth practiced was practicing big canoe, but being called when you're called up onto the shore, right? And so here we had elder, I'm trying to think here, who was the elder that was calling that day? I honestly think it was actually Butch Dick who was calling that day, and when we were at Royal Roads. And so what happens for those that have witnessed this or are new to witnessing this, you're actually called upon, right, to actually identify yourself, identify your family or your canoe, who you are, and you'll be asked or greeted or welcomed upon shore. And so here, this group of students not only learned how to go out, but they were encouraged to learn how to speak for the family and being identified for the family. Stakaya is our sea wolf. So Stakaya is our big canoe that we take out and we practice that. The young lady at the front, I have watched and witnessed through this process of going through being really nervous because there's a whole bunch of people around you. You're going to have to now stand and speak on behalf of your family, but have the whole family to be able to be supported in that. For me, I was a witness to this on this day, but I actually never organized any of this. This came through the work of district team at Middle and through the work that happened at Shoreline. So to be able to activate and encourage and identify, here's the framework that we need to look at when we're activating reciprocity and we're looking at it through this lens. And here's what this might mean for Indigenous youth. Now we transfer that over to the responsibility for others classrooms, administration, school community to activate. So then that way they are the ones that are responsible for activating this piece here. So this is the story of Stakaya. So we'll flip the page. Salmon stands for belonging, transitions, and connections. And I do want to really honor and acknowledge like the work that each of the 4 houses put in identifying and coming through this process. This wasn't like picking something, writing it, and then being done for the day. This took us 1.5 years to navigate through what was going to be really intentional and what was that going to look like to hold that narrative for Greater Victoria School District for us to operationalize and implement. What you see here is actually is a beautiful story. So this is Sundance Bank Elementary School. And what I want to tell you about Sundance Bank is that we have a very low population of Indigenous students. But the PAC at Sundance Bank had come forward and said, we really want to acknowledge and understand what it means for belonging for Indigenous children and families in this community. So they came forward, they stepped forward to the elementary district team, which then stepped forward to us to be able to say, how do we activate belonging and make sure that we do it in a really congruent and authentic way? So they hosted a drumming workshop where non-Indigenous parents with non-Indigenous children participated in understanding what are the stories of the drum and why do we have a drum program? And what does that mean for us as a school district to be able to activate that? Even though we might not have a school that has a large population of Indigenous students, we as family and parents and community really want to understand and better understand how to be able to do this in a good way. So that work became activated through the use of understanding that, okay, we're going to examine, we're going to look at what does belonging, transitions, and connections mean for us, and where is somewhere we want to start. And that came through the parents that wanted to be able to activate that for their community, to anchor that in their understanding as they started to build out their responsibility. When we go back to the 5 R's, their responsibility to actually supporting the strategic plan for Indigenous learners. So this is part of how this is going to start to weave its narrative together. We'll move forward one more, which ties us into Raven, right? One of the biggest things that that continues to be talked about, and I think when we sit here in a governance circle and we're having this conversation, I'm certain that many of you, or if not all of you, have heard across in your various communities that you have participated in meetings provincially as it relates to education in BC, that we as Indigenous people, our children have an inequity between non-Indigenous students in schools across the province. And that is also true for us in the Greater Victoria School District. We have an inequity of completion rates. We have an inequity of where our children are at in literacy and numeracy. And we have to really focus in with intention on how do we do a better understanding where we need to go, but how do we do that through a culturally responsive lens? And how is that activated not only by every level, but every area of support of a school district? So this isn't that the inequity gap needs to be closed by the Indigenous Education Department for Indigenous learners. This is about how do we use an Indigenous framework that have been written by Indigenous people with community, and then use that framework to activate it in a culturally responsive and relevant way. So it's not taking a Western framework and then being able to say, we're going to use this Western framework and ways of knowing and being and apply that to an Indigenous child and expect that there's going to have a better result and outcome. Right. So we need to look at what does it mean to be relevant? What does it look like reciprocity? What does it look like to be able to be rooted in relationships? And how does that become the responsibility of me, of Deputy Caldwell, of every classroom teacher, of you as board, as a partner groups? How does that become our collective responsibility to understand that when we look at the children that we have the responsibility for, and the work that we're doing in Indigenous education is to activate and support Goal 2, but not to solely own Goal 2. That's our collective responsibility. So it's about sharing the framework. Let's activate that together. Let's make sure that we're using culturally relevant resources. Let's ensure that we're using Indigenous pedagogy, which is anchored in the 5 R's. And then it's through Indigenous worldviews and perspectives, and that it's everybody's responsibility. So then that way, if I'll look at Director Canty right now, he might say, Shelley, I don't know how to do that from an Indigenous worldview, or I'm not really sure how to do that. But that doesn't mean that he gets to transfer his responsibility onto us. That means that we get to stand there and support him through how he understands it so he can activate that with his team. And so we do that with every department, but we also do that across every level with the district principals, whose then responsibility is to work that through with their schools and the classrooms that they're supporting. And so where's our next two spot? If we flip one more, Andy. Our next two spot is that these are our beautiful children, right? These are the children of community. These are the children of Greater Victoria School District. These are the Indigenous youth that are ready, that are here, that are the ones that are saying, like, we want you to activate that. We want you to be a part of those conversations. They're the ones that we're seeing. There's also the other side of this that we discussed is that this is only 49% of our possible completed graduates. We're missing 40% of our children from not completing school at this current time. So the responsibility really is to activate. How do we do this differently? How do we anchor back in through what FESL is telling us, what our data is telling us? How do we anchor back into activating goal 2 in a meaningful way? But that goal 2 isn't the responsibility just solely of Indigenous people. That goal 2 is an Indigenous way of knowing and being, but it's activated and shared responsibility for all, because we definitely need to see these numbers grow. And we know the conversation that we've been having ongoing is that we are a district that does really value diversity, culture. We really want to celebrate, what does it mean to have inclusion and all those aspects. But part of that is also understanding why that's not happening and how we need to do things differently. So our next part is to continue to activate this implementation of this framework. Training will go out now for secondary, then middle, then elementary and early years. So it's going to start from secondary and work its way down. And we'll activate a full training with the district team so the district team is going to help us with that work to be able to bring in all of our administrators to be able to do that work, to have the anchoring of that foundational understanding, because this isn't our little team coming in and saying, okay, here's how we're going to do this, and this is what we're going to do. This is about how do we stand beside you, Chair, right, to be able to do this work in the way that you are, and that you feel safe enough to be able to ask us the questions that you might not know, but that you're still doing that as a family member, that we can then be able to dialogue and engage in these conversations. I'm excited. I think that it's a great privilege to not only share in this work, but it's a great privilege to hear the stories of our young people, of our elders, and of community, and to know that we can bridge that forward. But it does have to be done not from a Western perspective in this way for our children. We do have to anchor it in an Indigenous philosophical worldview, and we do have to activate it through the use of everybody's shared responsibility in that. So I think that's where I'll leave it, because I could go on for like a really long time in this, but I'll leave it there. I'll open the floor for questions. I truly want to thank you for just letting me share about where we're currently at and where we're going. And I do want to extend the invitation for each and every one of you. If you find the opportunity to join us in one of those, or you find the opportunity to join a member from a department or district team in one of these opportunities, please take it, right? Because it's the heart work of why we do what we do. So thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Dr. Nimi. Yeah, I'd like to open the floor for questions if anybody has them. Go ahead, Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, thank you to Deputy Superintendent Caldwell for the introduction, and to Dr. Nimi for the presentation, and just yeah, it is exciting. It's exciting to see all of the good work being done to support Indigenous students, I think, and their families. And I think, from my perspective, I'm excited to see this sort of change in approach and the collaboration and the building of knowledge and understanding, and truly kind of embracing this idea of shared responsibility. I think that's such an important piece that I'll certainly take away from this particular presentation. And it's not because it's the first time Dr. Nimi has shared that with us, but because I think for me, it's a really important piece. The idea that as a system, we all have to embrace our responsibility, that we can't only look to the expertise of Dr. Nimi's department and her colleagues, that this really does take a system-wide commitment. And I'm hearing that. And I think it's an exciting thing to celebrate. And the work, is a privilege, because when you see those faces of students who, are excited to be at school, or maybe not so excited to be at school at this point, but we want them to feel a sense of belonging, and that we want them to be able to achieve, within the system. So thank you for bringing us back to that piece about shared responsibility. Then I'm also thinking about how we continue to monitor our progress. And so putting governor hat back on, really appreciate that we are part of the family as a board and as trustees. And but that governance piece means that we have that added responsibility of ensuring that we are monitoring progress, and where we do need to be maybe redirecting investments or capacity, the people capacity in the system to support Indigenous students, that we do that in a timely fashion, and that we kind of continue to support you, Dr. Nimi, and your team as you're supporting everyone within the family and within our education system to do that learning and that collaboration. So, I'm interested to know from your perspective, Dr. Nimi, how you see that ongoing sort of monitoring, that governance piece, because it's not just about the data. Like, I love the fact that you brought stories this evening. I think that really gives us a more holistic sense of how the implementation looks. Sometimes as a board, what we see is the numbers, and we don't necessarily benefit from the stories about the implementation of a change really in approach. So I'm wondering, as monitoring increases around the governance table, what you sort of think that's going to look like, or what your recommendations are. Mm-hmm. And again, not putting you on the spot, but just if to the extent that you've thought about what it might look like around our table, if you wouldn't mind sharing that would be really wonderful.
Mm-hmm. I have a couple pieces, and I think that this is going to start to grow itself as well. So I'd like us to continue to revisit this too. So I will share that, because I think that as it starts to become activated, we always need to have the ability to come back, readjust and realign through that. But the first and foremost, I think the biggest thing that we know about being culturally responsive and relevant, the umbilical cord of that is the recipients of the service. So we need to be able to confidently ask each of the 4 houses, how do you feel your children are doing in Greater Victoria School District? And what data and street data are you receiving from your community members that are informing you that? Because the way that that's going to look like and feel like for the rights holders might be very different than the Métis community. And so when we look at those aspects, I think that number one, we have to have the accountability for how we're upholding those agreements, all 4 of them, right? And that has to be first and foremost as a governance system, and as the board, your responsibility is those agreements. You signed on them, right? You said we're committing to this, right? So the recipients of the service, we need to ask them, right? So I think there's that part there. The second part is I actually think we're in the place now where we're transitioning, and we've transitioned as a Greater Victoria School District, where we don't have an ANEC table like we used to, because that morphed itself, but we need to have the 4 tables, the 4 houses terms of reference, so they can collectively come back together in the means to work with governance to be able to say, this is actually what we need collectively. And that's where governance interfaces, I think, with the 4 houses to ask those critical questions, right? Because you need to be in that relationship, that shared responsibility to make decisions that way. The third thing is that, and I'll echo it again, this isn't the IAD department taking the responsibility to say, we can change all of this. We can walk beside you as you do this, right? So this is for us to walk beside you in governance, walk beside senior leadership, walk beside the 4 houses, walk beside district team, walk beside classroom teachers, right? That's the work, right? I look at, and I see Lena, our GVTA chair, like Brody chair, we're walking beside GVTA and activating pieces, right? So it's not us taking it on for GVTA. It's about how do we do this shared collective responsibility, knowing that Indigenous people have to sometimes create the frameworks because they come from our worldviews. But that doesn't mean that you can't activate the responsibility for the outcomes of them. Right. And so I think that's our shift of where we need to go as we navigate in this work. And so I appreciate you saying and bringing back the conversation about a shared responsibility, because it is. And you'll hear me echo, Indigenous education doesn't belong to everyone because it belongs to Indigenous people. But Indigenous education is the responsibility of everyone. Right. And so that is our collective family work, right? That is where I cannot do this job without district team. I cannot do this job without finance. I cannot do this job without Lena as Pro-D chair, right? Because then I don't have people to activate the work, right? So if you're not there to help activate the work, then I don't know how to do the work, right? Because then it puts it back onto Indigenous people, then trying to change the narrative and the outcomes, and that is the privilege that is then transferred off of the system owning its responsibility to activate that. So I think that's the important piece for us is how do we do that work in a family way and have the courage to say the difficult things that need to be said, to look at what our current narrative and stories are, and have a hyper focus, but do that in a way that's intentional through relationships. So I don't know if that fully answers accountability for you, but I think what it does is it can lead us towards a governance structure that says we need to be in a relationship and we need to be able to ask you as the recipient of the service if you feel seen and heard and are receiving or rearing the outcomes that you'd like to see for your children.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that a great deal, and I look forward to being part of that work along with you.
Of course.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm not seeing any other hands for questions. So if there are none, I will take us back to the agenda. And it looks like we don't have any notice of motion or general announcement, which brings us to adjournment. Can I get a mover for adjournment? That is moved by Trustee Duncan, and all those in favor? And that is unanimous.